Hello and welcome. In this video we'll be adding a very simple HUD to our platformer game, but we're also going to be doing a lot of refactoring in our code to make sure that the HUD and the player are being handled well during scene transitions and that sort of thing. It's going to be a bit of extra work, but I think it'll pay off in the future. So let's jump right in. Okay, so the main reason I want to refactor stuff is because I want to be able to separate certain things from the area scenes into an actual gameplay scene that holds the most basic gameplay components. For example, the player or the HUD. We don't need those in every scene that we load up, and instead we're going to have a persistent scene. So the first thing we need to do is create that. So I'll go up here and create a new scene, and this will just be a 2D scene. And I'm going to call this gameplay. And I'm just going to save it into the scenes folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to add here the player. And eventually we'll add the HUD here once we make that. We're also going to add a new node, and it'll just be a node 2D. And I'm going to call this node area. And this is going to act as a container that holds the areas that we load and unload. The next thing I'm going to do is, while we have the area node here selected, I'm going to go into node up here and groups, and I'm going to add an area container group. That way we can easily find this particular node from the game manager, which is what we're going to be using to load and unload scenes. Similarly, we'll also want to go into the player scene and add the player to its own player group. Once again, this will just make it really easy for the game manager to find the player so that we can mess around with the player's position after we load a new scene. So now that the player and the area container are in a group, save both scenes, and now we're going to be doing some work on the game manager script. So let's open that up. Okay, so we're going to add a few variables here to begin with. First, I'm going to add a starting area variable. Starting area. And this will just make it a little bit easier to keep track of what level we want the player to start in. Next, we're going to add a area container variable. And this will, of course, hold the area container, which is a node 2D. And finally, we're going to add the player variable, which will hold the player controller node. And now what we want to do is we want to get access to these two variables. And we're going to do that in the ready function. Before we do any kind of reset, we're going to be saying area container. Oops. Area container is going to equal to get tree dot get first node in group area container. I want to make sure we spell this part right. Looks good. And then for the player, we're going to do something very similar. Well, really the same thing. We're going to say get tree dot get first node in group player. So now the game manager will have access to both of these nodes and we'll be able to do things with them, like using the area container to load up the areas and the player to move them around depending on where the area wants the player to start at. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, because it's bugging me a little bit, is we're going to change this function called next level to next area, because everything else is called area. I'm not sure why I called this one next level. I'm just going to highlight it, Control-Shift-R, and now we're going to say find next level and replace it with next underscore area. I like to leave all these checked when I do this, and replace, and then replace all, and reload. There we go. Okay. And so now it should be working just as before, but it's got a more consistent naming convention. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new function called load area. And this function is going to take in a variable here that'll be the area number that we're trying to load. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few of these things and throw them into load area. In particular, I'm taking the statements that have to do with creating the path. Just cut them and paste them right here. I'm going to now call load area here. And we'll pass in current area as the area number that we're trying to load. So I haven't really changed any functionality yet. I've just been moving some stuff around. But having this load area function, we're going to be adding quite a bit of things here. Okay, so let's get to work on the load area function. So one of the things that's going to be different is we're not actually going to be changing the scene anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take both of these statements and comment them out. We're not going to need them right now. And what we want is to load the scene that we want to go to in addition to the persistent scene gameplay that we made, and we want to make it a child of the area container. Let me pull that up here in the gameplay tab. So we want the newly loaded scene to go in here. So once we have the path of the scene that we want, we're going to create a scene variable, and scene variable will be equal to load full path, and we want to load that as a packed scene. And this extra bit of code here, this as packed scene, is not really necessary, but it will make it so that we can access scene with all of the autocomplete things that GDScript would give us. And then we also want to check if the scene is not valid. If the scene is equal to null, then what we want to do is get out of here. We want to return. We don't want to load a new scene or unload the current scene if the scene is null. So here we'll just make a little comment that says checking the new scene path. And that's the first part of our load area function. Okay, now the next section, what we want to do is we want to remove the previous scene. I'm just going to add a comment here that says removing the previous scene. And we're going to do that with a for loop. So what we want to do is we want to loop through all the children in the area container. So we'll say for child in area container dot get children. Whoops. There we go. So that'll loop through all of the children in the area container and will give us an instance of each one that we can then say child.queueFree, which will remove the area container's child from the scene, or from the tree, I should say. Now, the thing about this is not instant. This won't happen until, I believe, the end of frame or the end of physics frame. And so what we want to do is we want to sort of wait for this operation to finish, because if we don't, then both scenes will sort of exist at the same time for a while. And while that may not be a huge deal, it could cause some issues as we're looping through the groups and finding things, for example, the portals and things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an await here. Await child dot tree exited. And so this will wait until this child that just got queue-freed exits the tree, and then it will continue the code. So that's going to be our removing the previous scene section. Okay, and next what we want to do is set up the new scene. We'll put another comment in here. Setting up the new scene. Now we've already loaded the new scene, assuming it's valid, and so what we need to do now is instantiate it. So we'll say var instance equals scene dot instantiate, and this scene is the same as this one up here that we loaded. And now what we can do is we can say area container dot add child instance. And now what we can do is just say the reset energy cells here. Once the new scene is fully loaded and the previous scene is fully unloaded, we can reset the energy cells right here, meaning that this setup area that does that, up here calling it whenever we go to the next area, we can just delete this altogether. We're not going to use this anymore. And I'm also going to remove it from here. There we go. And that is our new load area method. We'll add a few more things to it a little bit later, but for now this will work. Okay, so next what we want to do is we want to go back into the area template scene. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take the player out of here, because we don't want the player to be associated with the areas themselves anymore. So we'll just go to the template, remove the player, save, And now if we go to area 1 and 2, you can see the player is no longer there. So that's great. Additionally, we need to change the default scene that gets loaded in when we play the game. So we'll go to Project, Project Settings. And here in Project Settings, we want to go to Run. And if yours looks different from mine, it might be because I have advanced settings turned on. You can turn it on and off, it doesn't matter for this. You just got to pick which you want the main scene to be. In our case, we're going to switch it over to Gameplay. There we go. And close this out. And back in the script for the game manager, now we just need to make sure that the first area for the game is getting loaded in the ready function here. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to, first of all, we can take this line out and we will say load area, starting area. There we go. So once it finds the area container and the player, which are in the persistent gameplay scene, it'll also load the starting area, which is just going to be 1, using the new function we created here, and we can reset the energy cells there at the end. Before we test it out though, there's a couple more things we need to do. One thing I'd like to do is to have each area have a player start position. That way we can detail where the player should be moved to when a new area is loaded, since the player won't be being reloaded. So we're going to go into the area template scene, and we're going to add a player start position node, which will just be a node 2D. And we're going to rename it to player start position. And every scene will have this. I'm just going to move it up, maybe to like right there, maybe to the top. And we're going to put it into a group. And it'll be a player start position group. Make sure I spelled that right. Okay. Add. And we're just going to be looking for this node from the game manager so that we can move the player to the newly loaded scene. To do that, we're going to go back into the player script, player controller script, and we are going to add a new function in here. I'll put it at the bottom. And this will be called the teleport to location. And it'll take in a new location. And this is going to be really simple right now, but we will add a little bit more to it in a bit. So it'll just take the player's position and apply the new location to it so as to teleport the player. Additionally, we need to go into the game manager script. And when we load a new area, we're going to need to call the player teleport method right in here. We're going to call the method right after we reset the energy cells over here. And we'll need a reference to the player position node, so we'll need to find that in the group. So we'll say var player start position equals to get tree dot find, oh sorry, not find, get first node in group player start position, and we'll make sure that everything there is spelled right. And we'll be doing this as a node 2D, again just so that we can have the autocomplete. And we're going to say player dot teleport to location. And this is the location that we want to teleport to. Well, more specifically, we want the player start position dot position, because this is a node 2D. And there we go. Okay, and to test this out, we're going to go into area 1 and area 2 and change the starting positions. So now we've got this node player start position here that we can move around. And you could, if you didn't want to make this a node 2D, you could make this a sprite or something just so that it's easier to see. I'm going to leave it as is for now. And I am going to turn on the grid. Let me see. Yeah, use grid snap. There we go. So I'll leave this one where it is for area 1. But then in area 2, just to make sure that we're testing this properly, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it to the side. Let me turn on the grid again. Move it to the side and move it up a bit, just so that we know for sure that it's working, since that's a sort of a weird place to start with. And now we're going to run this. And in area 1, it starts off where you would expect. And we're going to grab the 4 energy cells, go to area 2, and yeah, it starts up at the top there and drops me down. So now we can set a starting position for the player in each area, which that'll be really handy. But if we go into the remote tab here on the scene tab, here you can see that all of this has been so that now we have a gameplay node in the remote tab, a player node, and these will be persistent. And then the area node, which is also persistent, will be holding all of the areas that we load into the game via the game manager. And we can actually see this if we just do a quick reset, run it again, and let me move this over to the side a bit, go into the remote tab. Okay, so now you can see under area, we've got area 1, and if I go in here and I grab all these, keep an eye on this, you can see it loads area 2, but this whole scene doesn't get reloaded. And so now the player can be a persistent entity as the scenes get loaded and unloaded. And once we put the HUD under the gameplay scene, we'll also be able to have a persistent HUD throughout the different levels. So that has been the goal of this whole refactor that we've been doing, and it seems to be working just fine now. Before we get to work on the HUD though, there's one last thing I want to tweak because it's bothering me already, and it's going to be here in the player scene. So we're going to open up the player script, and we're going to make it so that the camera doesn't zoom to the player when the player is repositioned. Let me show you what I mean in case you missed it. So we're in area 1, we'll grab the energy cells, and when I go through this portal, it'll move the player instantly, but the camera will take like half a second to move over to the player. You see that? And I think we can fix that pretty easily. So let's go into here, we'll add an export variable. And this will be the camera. And it'll be of type camera 2D. And all we really need to do is we need to go into the teleport to location. And before we teleport the player, what we'll do is we will set the position smoothing of the camera to false. And after we teleport the player, we'll have the camera position smoothing set to true. And that should fix that. Let's try it out. Oh, I never added the camera into the export here in the inspector. Let's do that real quick. Whoops. Okay, reset that. There we go. Okay. It's still doing it. Oh, I probably need to wait a physics frame because otherwise it's getting set back to true very quickly. So get tree dot physics frame. So we're waiting for a physics frame before we turn it back on to give the camera enough time to actually move before turning this back on. So let's give that a try. Okay, so we'll just grab these again and go through the portal. There we go. That's what we wanted. Great. Fantastic. So now let's work on the HUD. Okay, so I did already make a folder here and import some fonts, and these fonts are from Kenny Assets. And if you're not familiar, Kenny is a website where you can get all sorts of game developer assets for free, and you can use them in even commercial projects. It's really great. They've got 2D, 3D UI. They've even got some audio stuff. This is where I got the fonts, and they've got just all sorts of stuff here, and it's really high quality stuff. Great for prototyping or even making a whole game out of it. Look at this, they've even got one that looks like Lego. That's really cool. I've never seen that one before. But yeah, definitely check them out. I'll have a link down in the description. Really awesome stuff, and you can even donate if you want to show your support for all the great work they're doing over here. Great stuff. So now what we need to do is we need to create a new scene. But before we do that, let's create a canvas layer here in the gameplay persistent scene. So we'll say, oh, there it is, canvas layer right there. So we'll just drag this up to the top, and inside the canvas layer is where we'll have all of the UI stuff. So we'll just save that. And now we need to create a new scene. So we'll go up here, new scene, and this will be a user interface scene. And I'm going to call this HUD. Okay, so here we're going to have just a very simple HUD. We'll make it nicer later, but just enough so that we have the infrastructure for creating this sort of thing. So the first thing we're going to do is a texture. a texture rect here. And we're also going to want a label. And actually one more label underneath the texture rect. And for the texture rect, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the energy cell texture. There we go. And I don't want it to be stretched like that. So that's going to be under stretch mode here. We want to say keep aspect. There we go. So now if we resize it, it'll keep its aspect. So that's lovely. And then I'm just going to call this the, not that one, this one. I'm going to call this the energy cell texture. And I'll call this the energy cell label. And this can be the portal label. Okay, let's go ahead and save the scene, and we'll save this under scenes. I'm actually going to make a new folder. This will be the UI folder, where we can put all the UI scenes in the future. Call it HUD is fine. There we go. And also I'm going to turn on grid snap for the HUD. It just makes it a little bit easier to line things up. And let's put in some test text here, just so that we can kind of see where these labels are. And okay, so for the energy cell texture, what I'm going to do is I'm going to anchor it to the top left there. And you can see the green symbol there is where it's anchored. So now I can move it, and it is anchored to the top left of the screen, which is what we want. I'm going to do the same thing for the portal label. In fact, it looks like it's already there by default, so that's fine. And okay, so let's move this below this. And this one, I want it to be anchored to the side here of the energy cell texture. So let's do that. And I can actually move this anchor. Yeah, there we go. Just so that it snaps to the grid there. Now what we can do is just move these guys around and get them positioned where we want. I think somewhere around maybe here for that one. Maybe here for this one. Again, we'll make this nicer later. But that should look okay. Let's try saving and playing this. Well, actually, first we need to go into the gameplay scene, and we need to add the HUD to the canvas layer. So go into here and instantiate the HUD. There we go. Save and hit play. And there we go. There's our HUD. And as you can see, even if I resize the window, it stays in that top left corner there. So that's good. It's a little bit small, so we'll need to make it bigger, and we need to add our fonts that we imported into there. But it's a good start. So back in the HUD scene, what we're going to do is we're going to go into one of the labels. Doesn't really matter which one, because I'm going to use the same font for both of them. And we're going to click on label settings here, and we want new label settings. And then we're going to click on that to open it up. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and save this, save as, and I'm just going to drop it into the assets folder for now. Here we go. Well, actually, we can make a new folder for it, and we can just call it, UI settings. In case we want to do any other kinds of UI saved settings here, we'll call this new label settings is fine. We'll just hit save. And what I want to do is add in a quick load of one of these. I've already tested these font files on my own, and I like I think it's the Kenny Mini that I really like for this. Yeah. And let's increase this maybe to like 32. That's a little bit bigger, yeah. Now with these pixel art fonts, you do have to be careful how you resize them. A lot of them need to be resized in intervals of 8, so 8, 16, 32, etc. And if you don't do that, the text can get really blurry. So we can actually try that out here real quick. Let's try a few different font sizes and see what works. For 8, it works. For 16, it works. Let's see if 24 works. Yeah, so I think it's like, you gotta add 8 to it every time. And it kind of depends a little bit from font to font, but we're gonna go with 32. I think that looks pretty good, and it doesn't make it blurry. So this will be the portal label. And now what we can do is we can move this one down a little bit because it is a little bit in the way there. I'm actually gonna make this a little bit bigger too because it did look small. So let's go into layout, for the energy cell. And actually, let's make it bigger like this. Let's see. That looks pretty good right there, I think. Let's go with that for now. And we will have to move this a little bit. It looks like when I made it bigger, it kind of uncentered it. There we go. And we'll put that there. Make this a little bit bigger. And then here, what we can do now is we can actually load the label settings that we saved, which is great because now if I go into here and I want to make changes to this label settings, for example, let's say I wanted to change the font size to 48, it'll change it on both. And you may not want that, it depends, but for our purposes, I think that's going to be really nice. I'm going to put it back on 32, and I do want to make this be center aligned, and just try to get this as centered as possible with the energy cell icon here. So we're just going to tweak this a little bit, and that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and type out here times, we'll say 0, 0. This is just going to be a counter for how many energy cells the player has. That looks pretty good. And this is going to be basically telling the player if the portal is open or not. So we can actually make this say portal closed, for example. And we're going to have an icon for this later, but for now this will work. Let's go ahead and save. Okay, so next we need a script for the HUD. So we will just attach a script here and we can call it HUD. That's fine, but that's not where I want to save it. I'm going to save it in scripts. Okay, and it can inherit from control. That's fine. We'll hit create. And we're going to give it a class name so it's easy to identify. Call it HUD. And basically we just are going to use this in order to change the labels. So it's going to be pretty simple right now. So we'll need export variables for the energy cell label. Energy cell label. And this will just be of type label. And we also want an export variable for the portal label. And type label. Okay, and we're going to have 3 functions here. One of them is going to update the energy cell label. So we'll call it that. And it's going to take in a number, which will be of type int. And it's just going to take the energy cell label and change the text on it to be X space, and we're going to add the number formatted as a string. The next function is going to be portal opened. Whoops. And this will just take the portal label and change the text to say portal opened. Portal open, and let's make that O lowercase actually. And then the next function is going to be almost identical to this one. And it'll just be portal closed. And we'll just say portal closed, ... and get more energy cells, or get energy cells. Give the player a hint about what to do to get the portal open. There we go. So we'll save that. And here on the HUD, we're going to click on that. We need to assign these exported variables. So that's the energy cell label. And this is the portal label. And now what we need to do is we need to access these functions from the game manager to update them. First, we'll click on the HUD node and go into node. We're going to add it into a group called HUD. There we go. And save. And then we're going to go into the game manager script. And actually, we're going to put in a note right here. We never did that. That says moving the player to the start position of the new scene. There we go. That way, our load area method, which is a little bit more complex than some of the others. Has some good notes on it. We don't need this anymore. Let's clean that up. Okay, so that's great. And what we're going to do is we're going to need a reference to the HUD. So first of all, we're going to go up here. We're going to say var HUD, and it's going to be of type HUD. And here at the ready function, we're going to say HUD equals get tree dot get first node and group HUD, and now down here, when we add an energy cell, what we want to do is we want to update the HUD. So we're going to say HUD dot update energy cell label, and we want to update it with this value of energy cells. And if we have enough energy cells to open the portal, what we want to do then is say HUD dot portal opened. And when we reset the energy cells to 0, we also want to update the energy cells. And we'll use, again, the energy cell variable, but we also want to do a portal closed call. There we go. And that should be everything we need. Let's go ahead and test this out, see if it works. Okay, so portal closed, get more energy cells, 0 energy cells. You can see it's counting up. 3, 4, portal open. Go in here, 0, portal closed, get more energy cells. Great, there we go. And that should cover just about all the functionality we wanted here. The HUD is still pretty simple, but now we've got all of the structure that we need to make it nicer later. As always, a special shout out to all the Patreons that support this channel. And if you want to help support the channel, I've got links down to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description. And also thanks to all of you who are watching this video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, that helps out a lot. And if you have some feedback or some special features that you want to see, make sure you put it down in the comments. Of course, you can subscribe if you want to keep seeing videos like this. And as always, thank you so much for watching.